So let's get going. Um, let me introduce myself very quickly, being that we have a number of great speakers tonight and this morning in Hong Kong. My name is Dusan Marinkovic, and I am an international trade specialist with the U.S. Department of Commerce's U.S. Commercial Service, working out of our Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia office, where, amongst a few other sectors, I work with companies in the environmental technology space. As some of you might already know, our organization, the U.S. Commercial Service, utilizes its network of about 100 domestic offices and another 130 offices around the world located at U.S. embassies and consulates to assist American businesses in entering new markets and increasing their international sales. You will hear more later in the program about some of our export promotion services that we provide to American companies, both in terms of helping them find suitable business partners abroad, as well as advocating for business interests with foreign governments. My colleague Ryan Russell will go into a bit more detail on this later in the program. Along with my colleague Sarah Moreno, who is our host today, my goal today is to help facilitate this session. So real quick, a couple of housekeeping issues. All participants are in the listen-only mode. In the interest of time, we will take questions by utilizing the Q&A box located on the right of your screens. So please feel free to pose your questions at any time, and we will address them during the Q&A portion of the webinar after all the presentations. You will notice that there is also a chat feature there, which you're welcome to use, but for questions, we kindly ask if you could use the Q&A box to ensure that we can see your question and address it in a timely manner. We can provide responses in writing to any questions we are unable to address during today's presentations. If you have any questions or technical issues during the webinar, please feel free to send a direct chat to myself or to the host, Sarah, and we will try to troubleshoot them as quickly as possible. I want to make sure I mentioned that today's session is being recorded so that it can be shared with participants for future use. So if anyone has any objections, please feel free to disconnect at this time. Everyone participating in today's webinar will receive copies of the PowerPoint presentations, as well as a link to the recording. I think you will have a great opportunity today to hear about Hong Kong's sustainable energy and environmental needs and opportunities. Hong Kong has ambitious plans to reach net carbon zero by 2050, and with the help from our partner, you will learn about opportunities for U.S. businesses as Hong Kong works toward these goals. Our colleagues in Hong Kong have put together a great lineup of speakers from the private sector, as well as our U.S. government representatives on the ground and in the U.S. through our collaboration with the Hong Kong Business Environment Council. So to get us started, it is my pleasure to turn it over to our Senior Commercial Officer in Hong Kong. Mr. Bradley Harker has over 20 years of experience promoting U.S. growth internationally. He has represented our organization in various capacities and locations, helping facilitate major investments in Europe, Asia, and the U.S., building an extensive network amongst government officials, business, academia, and non-governmental sectors. So we are very glad that he was able to join us to welcome you to this session and to MC the event. So Brad, welcome, and please, you may begin.
Thanks so much, Dusan. Appreciate that. We're just thrilled to be able to partner with the Business Environment Council in Hong Kong on this webinar today. I'd like to note that we've got a lot of companies and leaders in this sector that are joining us. Currently, we've got 73 attendees, which is fantastic, and we're really gratified to see this level of interest because there's really so much that we can do together. Before we hear from our speakers, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our U.S. Consul General for Hong Kong and Macau to say a few remarks. Consul General Smith has been serving in his present position here in Hong Kong since July of 2019. Prior to coming to Hong Kong, Consul General Smith served as the Director of the Office of Chinese, as China's alignment. And during the Biden administration, I have flipped. excuse me. Consul General Smith, over to you. Sorry, my remarks got...
Sure. Thanks very much, Brad. Good morning and good evening, everyone, to all of our participants who are joining us from two very different time zones in Hong Kong and the United States. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on trends and opportunities in sustainable energy and environmental technology in Hong Kong. I'd like to give special thanks to the Hong Kong Business Environment Council for co-organizing this timely and important event with our commercial team. We strongly support the Hong Kong government's commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. In the midst of all of the crises the world is confronting right now, we cannot lose sight of the importance of tackling climate to avoid a dangerous trajectory, and we urgently need to work together to reduce emissions. The purpose of today's webinar is to increase the connectivity between US and Hong Kong industry and government to help achieve our common climate goal. Like Hong Kong, the United States is taking ambitious steps to combat the climate crisis, and the President has set us on the path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. On January 27th of last year, the President signed an executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And last November, the White House published the long-term climate strategy of the United States, outlining in detail how the US will significantly reduce emissions during this decisive decade. The President has affirmed that the United States will exercise its leadership to promote greater climate ambition throughout the world and build upon the Paris Agreement's three overarching objectives. First, maintaining a safe global temperature. Second, increasing climate resilience. And third, aligning financial flows toward lower greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. We have launched a coordinated whole of government approach to address climate change and capture economic opportunities. On top of this, the President has called for a whole of society approach in recognition that government cannot achieve climate goals alone. The private sector has a central role to play. And there are few places in the world with a more innovative and talented private sector than Hong Kong. So it is heartening to see those talents focused on the climate challenge. One of our key missions here at the US Consulate General in Hong Kong and Macau is to promote US exports and build an even stronger trade relationship between the United States and Hong Kong. We applaud the Hong Kong government's plans to allocate about $30 billion over the next 20 years to implement measures on net zero electricity generation, green transport, and waste reduction. And our team here at the consulate is ready to help US businesses understand and connect with opportunities that will arise from these investments. We look forward today to hearing from three distinguished speakers and experts as they share their insights about the needs and opportunities that exist in the growing green energy and environmental technology market here in Hong Kong. Simon, Jim, and Nigel, thank you very much for being with us today. Brad, back over to you.
Thank you, Consul General Smith. So now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers and announce the remainder of the agenda for today's webinar. We will first hear from Simon Ng. He's the CEO of the Business Environmental Council here in Hong Kong. Simon is well known in Hong Kong for his experience in academic and policy research, project management, and stakeholder engagement. Our team here at the consulate values our relationship with Simon and his team, and we appreciate the willingness of the Business Environmental Council to co-organize this webinar with us today. Next, we're thrilled to be able to hear from Jim Taylor, who's the Senior Director of Planning and Development of China Light and Power, Hong Kong's largest power provider. Jim is also the committee co-chair of the Energy, Environment, Social and Governments Committee at the American Chamber of Commerce here in Hong Kong and has tremendous experience in electricity, gas, and environmental issues. Jim will speak about Hong Kong's climate vision for 2050. Finally, we will hear from Nigel Matravers, Director and General Manager of Alba Integrated Waste Solutions, Hong Kong Limited. Nigel will speak about resource management in Hong Kong and share his insights about opportunities for business and innovation. Nigel has expertise in the waste and resource management sector and has been responsible for the design, financing, and project management of numerous resource management programs in Hong Kong and the United Kingdom. We're fortunate to have the opportunity to hear from these experts in their respective fields. Following their remarks, we will have time for some question and answers. During the webinar, you can type your questions in the chat box that you see on the screen, and we will do our best to get your questions answered. And now, I look forward to handing the floor over to Simon from the Business Environmental Council. Simon?
Well, thank you, Bradley. Good evening to the participants in the US, and good morning to those joining from Hong Kong. On behalf of Business Environment Council, or BEC in short, I want to extend a warm welcome to you all for attending today's webinar on trends and opportunities in sustainable energy and environmental technology in Hong Kong. Echoing the comment made by Consul General Smith on Hong Kong-US relationship, I am extremely delighted for BEC to join force with the US Commercial Service in Hong Kong and organize this online event. BEC has always maintained a strong tie with US companies. We have member companies with headquarters in the US. We partner with the Energy, Environment, Social and Governance Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong on numerous past events that focused on environmental and sustainability issues. BEC is also regularly exchanging views with the US Consulate General on the latest environmental policies in Hong Kong. Speaking of environmental policies, 2021 was an important year as the Hong Kong SAR government announced 4 major policy documents covering key topics including waste management, popularization of electric vehicles, air quality management, and addressing climate change. A number of targets have been set, notably Hong Kong pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050, with an interim target to reduce Hong Kong's carbon emissions by 50% before 2035, compared to the 2005 level, supported by 4 major decarbonisation strategies, namely net zero electricity generation, energy saving and green buildings, green transport, and waste reduction, announced under Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2050. Another example is, according to the Waste Blueprint for Hong Kong 2035, the vision of waste reduction, resource circulation, and zero landfill was set with targets on per capita municipal solid waste disposal and recovery rate. To achieve those targets, we need financial resources and new investments to match the ambition. We need a collective drive for innovation and technologies to support change and transformation. We also need cross-sector and transboundary collaboration and to work together to stand any chance of success. In this regard, BEC is an independent corporate membership organization mandated to facilitate and support Hong Kong businesses in conserving the environment and achieving long-term sustainability. Since our establishment in 1992, BEC has been at the forefront of promoting environmental excellence to our members and the wider business community through partnership. Our 200-strong membership, representing multiple industries and in different sizes, are widely recognized as leaders in their respective sectors in practicing and enabling environmental protection and in contributing to the transition to a low-carbon economy in Hong Kong. They are always looking for new technologies and innovative solutions suitable for the business operations in both Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area, and they are also keen to share their insights on the challenges they are facing and the opportunities that lie ahead. I'm very pleased that 2 of BEC members, CLP Power Hong Kong Limited and Elba Integrated Waste Solutions Hong Kong Limited, will be speaking today. Both Jim and Nigel are brilliant speakers and experts in their field, and I am sure their sharing on this occasion will kickstart a timely and important conversation on energy and waste and net zero carbon, and foster a stronger trading relationship between Hong Kong and the United States. Thank you. Now, I would like to call upon our next speaker, Mr. Jim Taylor from CLP Power Hong Kong Limited. He's going to talk about Hong Kong's Climate Vision 2050, supporting a sustainable future. Over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Simon, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the webinar. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to manage to meet Simon's expectations in speaking about it. So today I want to outline in about the next 15 minutes Hong Kong's Climate Vision 2050, what CLP Power is doing to support that sustainable future. And I think probably the best way is just to get going. So next slide, please, Sarah. Now, I think Simon has mentioned there were 4 critical documents published by the Environment Bureau last year. Waste Blueprint in February, in March, followed by the Roadmap for Electric Vehicles, in June, Government's Clean Air Plan, and last but not least, in October, Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan. I think I should say that actually this is a really good example of what I would call joined up government, because the documents are mutually supportive, they are clearly interlinked. It's a carefully aligned strategy from government to see significant improvement in environmental performance over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 and up to 50 years. Now, what I want to focus on today is decarbonisation. So we should acknowledge that about 90% of the carbon emissions in Hong Kong come from electricity generation, transport and waste. So covering all of those 4 areas in the key directional documents issued by government last year is clearly very sensible to tackle 90% of the problem. And as Simon mentioned, actually the Hong Kong government has 4 key decarbonisation strategies. So net zero electricity generation, energy saving and green buildings, green transport and waste reduction. And today I'm going to focus on the first 3 of those. Nigel will talk a lot more about the waste reduction and the circular economy in Hong Kong. So next slide, please. Now this is quite a busy slide, but a little bit of background. Apologies for those living and working in Hong Kong, you'll know this already, but Hong Kong is something of a unique city. It's a densely populated urban area, and electricity occupies around about 60% of all the energy used in Hong Kong. Now, I think the equivalent figures in the US for electricity are much, much lower, maybe something around 20% because of the importance of transport and other sectors. Hong Kong is basically commercial sector rather than manufacturing sector. So what that means is because we have many commercial enterprises like the stock exchange, we have electrified transport like MTR system here. We also have very many high-rise buildings. That reliability for the electricity supply is absolutely critical. So as we decarbonise, we have to make sure that we maintain the reliability here. I'm talking to you today, we're working from home at the moment from the 30th floor of a tower block. If the power goes out, walking out to get a pint of milk or something and coming back up the stairs is a major undertaking. So we need to make sure that we maintain that reliability of an electricity supply as we move forward with decarbonisation. So on the top right of the slide, it's a little bit small maybe if you can see it, but broadly speaking, on the right hand side, and apologies to New York, on the right hand side, the large grey bar shows the number of minutes that customers are without supply on average in a year in New York. And the tiny little dot on the left hand side is that for Hong Kong, the CLP. So we actually operate a very reliable electricity supply. And on the bottom right hand side of the chart, again, New York on the right hand side with the average cost per kilowatt hour. And then the green bar on the left hand side is CLP. So we're able so far to deliver a very reliable supply at actually a pretty affordable price. Now, we all know around the world at the moment, things are challenging in the energy sector. And one of the issues we have to think about as we decarbonise is how we bring in additional supplies of zero carbon energy in a way that helps us maintain reliability. So if we think about things like renewable energy, for example, solar or wind power, they vary quite a lot depending on the season and the day. So as we go forward in decarbonisation, we'll have to try and balance the system to meet supply and demand and maintain that reliability. So I want to turn to the left-hand side of the chart. The little table on the left shows you the greenhouse gas emissions. These are from government figures in Hong Kong. And actually, Hong Kong peaked for greenhouse gas emissions in 2014. So we are now working really hard, and other sectors are doing the same, to reduce those carbon emissions as we go forward year by year. Now, the last publicly available figures are 2019, and you can see them in the table on the left. I have added 2020 figures based upon the assumption that the other sectors, their emissions have remained the same as in 2019, but I can verify that CLP, the biggest power business in Hong Kong, and our smaller brother Hong Kong Electric, actually saw a significant reduction in carbon emissions in 2020 as we moved away from coal to much more natural gas. So today, the figures probably are something like 60% from power generation, around about 18%, maybe 20% from transport, and then waste and so on. So it is true to say that the power sector has the biggest job to do in Hong Kong. And we're not frightened of that. We need to tackle that and move ahead with some solutions for the future. So next slide, please. So these are the climate action plan targets set by government. I think Simon's mentioned that the first 2035 target is a 50% reduction from the 2005 base year level. 2050, the target is very clearly carbon neutrality. For the power sector, the government has set some targets that are quite specific for us. You'll see on the left-hand side of the slide that the government has suggested that we should cease using coal for daily power generation by 2035. Now that target for CLP, we believe is achievable. Today, we're probably at around 15% coal, something of that order. So what we've got to concentrate now is moving away from coal in the next decade or so to meet that target. The government's also set a zero carbon target of 60 to 70% of electricity supply by 2035. Now for CLP Power today, my performance is roughly 35%. So I've got to double that basically in the next 15 years. In the longer term, of course, all the electricity supplied in Hong Kong has to be zero carbon. So government's been very clear that before 2050, we should achieve that objective. And CLP Power is confident that we can deliver that. Now, zero carbon energy in Hong Kong comes from a number of different sources. Currently, most of our zero carbon energy is nuclear, and that comes from the Daya Bay plant across the border in Guangdong. But government has also set increased expectations for RE development, and it's expecting that to be between 7.5% and 10% by 2035. And that will come from some offshore wind, waste to energy plants, which government are building, and solar. So in total, probably around about 7.5% to 10% by 2035 is the objective. But government would like to see that increase to perhaps 15% as we get closer to 2050. So they're the climate action plan targets that government set for Hong Kong. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to meet those targets? So I'm going to speak for CLP Power here, and I'm going to focus on 6 areas. So top left-hand side of the slide, you can see we have a slide labeled D2 and D1. Now, apologies for the abbreviation, but D units are the very latest combined cycle gas turbine units, highly efficient, and we have one operation already, D1. D2 is currently under construction and should be ready in a couple of years. And those are facilitating our move away from coal. On the top right-hand side, you can see a power line tower there. We're looking to upgrade the transmission capability we have to bring in additional supplies of zero carbon energy through regional cooperation in the longer term. And right at the very top in the blue bubble, you can see feed-in tariffs. A couple of years ago, we launched a very successful feed-in tariff scheme in Hong Kong. Now, as you can imagine, in a densely built urban environment, there's not an enormous amount of opportunity for PV solar. But in CLP's area, we have a lot of rural housing, and they do have opportunity for PV panels on the rooftops. And that scheme's been a great success. So I think with the contribution on some of the commercial buildings where you have a larger flat roof area, they can help us with increasing the proportion of RE in our fuel mix. The bottom three bubbles that I want to talk about, first on the left-hand side, that picture is actually a simulated photo of the new offshore LNG gas terminal that we are building in Hong Kong waters together with Hong Kong Electric. So that will enable us to bring in additional cargoes of liquefied natural gas, again helping increase the diversity of our supply and access a competitive priced world market. In the future, we see the opportunity maybe for hydrogen, zero carbon hydrogen. As that market begins to get going, I think we'll probably see not only pipeline supplies of hydrogen being available in the Chinese mainland, but potentially there is a lot of work going on now to look at whether hydrogen can be liquefied and transported by sea in the same way that natural gas has been for about 20, 30 years now. On the right-hand side of the slide at the bottom, you can see a picture of an offshore wind farm. Now, CLP is looking to see if we can build an offshore wind farm in the southeastern waters of Hong Kong. Our wind conditions here are okay. They're not as good as in some other latitudes, but they're still productive enough with the latest technology from turbines to see probably an efficient use of that resource. And that's something that we hope to see brought forward probably in the next 8 or 9 years. At the bottom, energy storage. If we do bring in more renewable energy into the system, we need to think about how we can manage that fluctuation to maintain our supply reliability. So we're also looking now at energy storage technologies to see if we can help manage that intermittency. So in summary, the way in which we plan to decarbonise our electricity supply is more zero carbon energy locally and perhaps through regional cooperation, moving out of coal altogether, replacing with natural gas, looking at developing RE resources locally where we can, and in the longer term, when the technology is mature and commercially available, we're hopeful that we can also utilise zero carbon hydrogen in our local plants to replace gas. Next slide, please. Now, the easiest way to save carbon is not to use so much energy. So I think energy use in buildings really matters. And we do know that many US companies are leaders in this field. So government has got a clear focus on improving the energy efficiency in buildings. Around about 90% of the electricity generated is used in buildings here in Hong Kong. As I mentioned, largely commercial buildings rather than in manufacturing. So actually energy used in residential and commercial buildings is very important. Probably around 65% of all the energy used is in those two categories. Now, that's up from 61% in 2009 and 50% in 1999 as industrial and transport energy use has reduced. So the focus is going to be on buildings, and therefore in its climate action plan, government set 2 targets. First of all, a medium-term target to reduce the electricity consumption of commercial buildings by between 15 and 20%, and residential buildings by between 10 and 15% by 2035. And then in the longer term by 2050, to basically increase those targets to sort of double that level. Now, government has outlined a number of policies that they're going to bring in to do that. They're going to make greater use of district cooling. They're going to have much more energy audits. They're going to tighten the building energy efficiency regulations. They will release more energy usage data and enhanced benchmarking tools. CLP and Hong Kong Electric are rolling out smart meters to all of our population right now. That's likely to be completed in the next 3 or 4 years. And something called MEALS is the mandatory energy efficiency labelling scheme. So for all products that use energy, like water heaters, like air conditioners, they all have an energy efficiency ranking. And that's also going to be extended to other equipment, gas appliances, and I think computer and similar equipment too. So for US businesses, I think there is a lot of opportunity here in terms of energy efficiency and green buildings going forward. Not just new buildings being built, designed to the best possible standards today, but existing buildings, because those are the ones that form the bulk of the built establishment that will be in place still in 2050. Okay, next slide, please. I want to turn to transport now. Hong Kong is, I think, one of the better markets for electric vehicles in the world. A very large proportion of private cars sold last year were EVs. A certain notable, very large US automotive company, which begins with the letter T, is something that's very visible on Hong Kong streets. If you look on the right-hand side of the chart, you'll see that for the latest data available, private cars actually represented almost 5% of Hong Kong's total carbon emissions. Now, the technology to electrify that sector is already here today and well established and proven. So I think there needs to be a really good focus on making sure we take the opportunity to electrify that sector very quickly. For medium goods vehicles, heavy goods vehicles, the technology is a little bit less mature. For light goods vehicles and taxis and the bus sector, it is a bit more mature. So, for example, just across the border from Hong Kong, the Chinese city of Shenzhen, getting close to 20 million people now in total, that actually already operates a very large fleet of electric buses and electric taxis. There's no reason why Hong Kong can't do something similar. So transport is probably now a little bit more than 20% of Hong Kong's total carbon emissions. So I think government has quite rightly placed a focus on the transport sector to move forward. So it's actually set a number of targets, including the phasing out of conventional internal combustion engine private cars by 2035 or earlier. And it is also looking at other technology solutions such as hydrogen fuel cells for some categories of transport that might be a little bit more difficult to electrify using today's technologies. So I think looking at the roadmap on the top right of the detail on the slide, popularization of electric vehicles, that came out last year in March. That really sets out how government's going to move forward for the next 10 to 15 years. We shouldn't forget the Clean Air Plan, because one major source of pollution in Hong Kong, air pollution, is actually roadside, and that's from conventional ICE vehicles on the street level. So with electrification, not only can we reduce carbon, but we can also reduce air pollution too. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, really, and I want to sort of look at, as they say for football, it's a game of two halves. Well, actually getting to carbon neutrality in 2050 is also a game of two halves. On the top side, demand side action, on the bottom side, supply side action. So just to recap, on the demand side, let's save every kilowatt hour we can in buildings, because that's an immediate saving in carbon. Let's look at electrifying the transport sector. That will also help to reduce carbon. And we're also looking at things like new energy ferries, buses, heavy duty vehicles, and so on. So if we work on the demand side, there's a material difference that we can make. But as an electricity service provider, I mentioned earlier on, I have to maintain my reliability. I have to do my best to maintain affordability, but I need to reduce the amount of fossil fuels in our generation mix. So the plan is to continue to phase down coal, to continue to actually look and explore for additional sources of zero carbon power, both locally and through regional cooperation, and then gradually to get to a position whereby I can reduce the carbon content 50% by 2035 and actually 100% by 2050. So that, in a very quick tour, is CLP's approach to supporting government in its 2050 carbon neutrality target setting. We believe we can get there. We do have a lot of work to do. So I guess, as they say, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get on with it. All right, so that's a summary from CLP Power from the electricity point of view. I think having spoken about three of those areas, I think we talked about net zero electricity generation, green transport, and energy saving. The area that we mustn't forget is waste reduction and the circular economy. So I think probably without further ado, I'll pass across to Nigel, who is the Director and General Manager for Alba Integrated Waste Solutions in Hong Kong, and a long-term Hong Kong veteran, I think, Nigel, 40 years in Hong Kong?
It is indeed, Jim, and I came to work on Castle Peak Power Station.
Thank you.
Boy, Thank you very much. Good morning and good evening. Yes, my background is resource management, often spoken to as waste management, but we think that resource management has a significant opportunity to help reduce carbon when it's properly managed. So I want to talk about really what the current situation is and what I think are the opportunities for innovation and business, particularly for US companies. Next slide, please. As Jim mentioned, the principal directive or direction for this for Hong Kong is the waste blueprint that was launched last year. And the blueprint really includes plans for waste reduction. One of those things that also includes landfill charging. At the moment, you can dump your waste for free. Development of producer responsibility schemes, and also increasing more recycling centres, local level, which are very attractive places to actually go and visit. But further, we need producer recycling schemes such as beverage bottles. Plastic bottles are a problem for the whole world, and we hope soon that legislation will come forward to really add value to the plastic bottles and therefore create the business opportunities to do that. And it also talks about final disposal, taking account of carbon reduction. In my mind, the strategy does not go far enough to link in with carbon reduction. I believe there's more opportunities to incorporate the resource management sector, particularly in recycling, and show that contribution towards carbon reduction. And we hope, as this strategy develops, we can encourage that thinking within government. But in my mind, there isn't really a clear strategy towards moving to the circular or the closed loop economy, really where we have to introduce the industry departments as well as the environmental departments. And I really think there's opportunities here for that. And in my mind as well, the blueprint is light when it comes to saying, well, how are recycled materials to be sorted? So although, like in the picture, lots of new centres have been receiving the material from householders, but where does it go afterwards? Next slide, please. Because I'm sad to say, Hong Kong is still very low tech. I mean, these pictures are only taken a few weeks ago, and it still very much depends on a low level to collect material so they can be recycled. And the bottom picture is a particular problem we have at the moment with COVID, is all of the polystyrene boxes that come across from the border that the mainland says it doesn't want back again. So there are opportunities really to bring in technology to move Hong Kong forward. Next slide, please. And one of these is smart collections. And again, this is something that there's lots of technology companies in the USA can help with, because by using smart collections, by putting detectors in bins, so you know when the bins are full and where they are, and then you can have more efficient vehicle collections. And again, using AI perhaps to also indicate what kind of material are being developed. The lower picture there is one of the vehicles we operate in Singapore, which has already moved in this direction towards smart collection systems. And we really would urge the business community, particularly from the US, to work with government and indicate that these systems are available and can make a contribution to how waste is managed and also improving the local environment. Next one, please. But our other challenge is mixed waste. As Jim has indicated, we all live in high-rise buildings for the most part. The factories and businesses, again, are high-rise, and it is very difficult to provide facilities for businesses in particular to separate their different wastes. So inevitably, a lot of the waste gets put into black bags and is taken to the street for collection. So this ability to separate at source is actually a real challenge here in Hong Kong. So next slide, please. So one of the keys, and again, this is something that the companies in the USA are very familiar with, is materials recovery facilities, or MRFs. The MRFs use all sorts of different technologies to separate the type of the waste into its different classes, using advanced separation technologies. It is something that I believe at the moment in the USA, one of these is being built a week. And I really would like Hong Kong government to take this on board and show that, in fact, they can be suitable for Hong Kong. There's always a fear that the land, there's never enough land, you know, with these buildings like the one in the photograph are too big. I do believe that there's opportunities to build smaller facilities, underground facilities and things like that. So again, we're really looking for experience from the US to come along and say, look, there are opportunities here. We can recover our materials in a much better way and recycle them and move towards the circular economy. And this is something I know the Business Environment Council is actively looking at the moment. Next slide, please. And here's a great one. In the US, there have been leaders in this idea of using robots for waste sorting. You see from the earlier photograph at the moment, we're still very dependent on people sorting the waste, but the technology's moved on. And there are all sorts of ideas using AI to educate the robots to how they can pick out the waste. And this can be done for recyclables, it can be done for construction waste. And again, we really think it'd be great for the guys in the US to come here with the support of the Consul General's office and work with and indicate to the government, look, there's some great technology out there. And this is also as Hong Kong's vision to be innovative. Why don't we start looking at more of these items at the moment? Certainly on my plans that I've got responsible for, we certainly are now looking at how can we incorporate robot picking to do the final sorting of the material rather than depending on humans to do that. Next one, please. Unfortunately, Hong Kong is one of the highest waste producers per person in the world. And therefore, that is a very big part of the strategy is how can that be reduced? But in the meantime, we have to manage the waste that we do have. There is a series of refuse transfer stations around Hong Kong. Another one is to be built, others to be refurbished. So again, this is an opportunity because again, the US was some of the first builders of refuse transfer stations in the world. And certainly, I worked on some of the early ones here. We looked to the US for the design ideas for these refuse transfer stations. They are big and they're in a very congested site. So there really is a great opportunity to bring ideas to make this work. And that top picture, which is in West Kowloon, was originally built by an American company. Landfills, unfortunately, are still with us, but the strategy is to avoid them. We have 3 very large landfills, but only 2 are now receiving municipal waste. And one of them will still need to be extended, and there will be a contract coming out soon to extend landfills there. But significantly, energy from waste plants, which Jim referred to. There's a plant presently being built out in the sea, so it is rather an expensive solution for managing the waste, with the waste materials being sent by ship out to the facility. And the government now in its blueprint has actually focused on this as a means of waste reduction, rather than some of the more schemes for sorting waste that you might see more in Europe, but actually saying it actually wants to build another 2 energy from waste plants. One site has been clearly identified, and the consultants are now looking for a 3rd site for that. There's a big debate about whether energy from waste is the right solution, but at the moment that's the direction that the blueprint is taking us. Next slide, please. But I would caution, and anybody coming in from overseas for the first time, the procurement systems here are complex and, in my mind, slightly old-fashioned. Inevitably, these projects are influenced by government. If they're not actually owned by the government, they are on government land or similar. And so the government procurement systems are something that you need to be prepared for, planned for, and I certainly would hope, urge the trade office of the Consul General to helpfully work with and encourage the government to make the procurement systems in Hong Kong more attractive to outside companies to come in. Last slide, please. Sorry, not last slide. But it's not all gloom. Sorry, there's some great projects here. The top one there is a brand new project that I've been part of, New Life Plastics, bringing new technologies in from Europe in this case, to treat some of the Hong Kong's plastic bottle waste, up to 30,000 tons, and make it into food grade plastic that can be reused, bottle to bottle. So this is final stages of being commissioned at the moment, and have solar panels on the roof, Jim, so you'd be happy with that. The other part, which is one I've been part of for the last 7 years, is the WE Park, which manages the electronic waste of Hong Kong. I think this is a great example. I think the government has done a very good job here in putting the legislation together to enable electronic waste to be properly managed in Hong Kong, and encouraged and supported this design, build and operate project, which has been my life for the last 7 years, to manage Hong Kong's electronic waste. And here we have the opportunity to use innovative techniques, and you'll see here on the bottom picture 2 robots that we do use for removing the screens of flat screen TVs, which are particularly difficult and also very highly polluting. So there are innovative projects in Hong Kong, and we really are encouraging for more of these projects of this nature. Okay, last slide, I think. So I put this down in my mind in the order that would be of interest for US companies, knowing the experience that US companies have. 2 further energy from waste plants. These will be large plants. Again, in the US, we have a lot of experience now of building energy from waste plants, not only in the US itself, but overseas. And so I think this is an opportunity here to take a look. There will be another extension to the landfill. And again, US companies are highly experienced in developing landfills. I really believe these transfer stations can, when they've been upgraded, can be made much more efficient using new technologies like AI to recognize the waste that's coming in, and other techniques, maybe incorporating sorting into the transfer stations themselves. And again, I think we can sell more of these ideas about the use of robots and AI to Hong Kong, which is always looking for innovative solutions. I really would think I would like to see more materials recovery facilities. And again, I would urge the Consul General's office to maybe work with the government to encourage them and again show the American expertise in developing such facilities. And similarly, smart collection. I really do think it needs it in the congested area that we have in Hong Kong, and taking account of some of the issues that Jim mentioned before. Smart collection would enable reduction in energy, reduction in the local pollution, and enable smarter sorting of the waste eventually. So hopefully I wasn't too negative about this. I do think there are opportunities for the US in Hong Kong going forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Nigel, Jim, and Simon. I couldn't agree really more. I mean, I've been here, especially with Nigel's comments on waste management. I've been posted in Hong Kong now almost 3 years, and I can tell you it's a huge difference from my time when I was in Osaka, where you were forced to separate your garbage pretty significantly, even cutting out the plastic from your milk cartons and separating those out. And so I totally agree. There's a long way to go as far as implementing policies and mandates for individual households just to be mandated to separate their garbage further, and also separating out the food waste as well. So we do have a couple of questions I'd like to pose to the group. The first one, decarbonization is the main theme in the region today. However, what about the traditional pollutants such as SO2, NOx, and then the associated PM 2.5 emissions that pollute the air in the air quality in the region when they burn fossil fuels? Can one of the panelists, perhaps this would be good for Jim, to comment about this issue?
Bradley, thank you very much, and thanks also for the question. It is a good question. I think it's probably fair to say that Hong Kong has made some significant progress in the last sort of 20 years in terms of the air quality here. Hong Kong is a small place, and we have a very large neighbour, so to a degree, the atmospheric conditions across the Greater Bay Area affect the air quality in Hong Kong. But I think there's more that can be done. But from fossil fuels, let's talk about 3 main sectors then. So transportation on the marine side, land transportation, and power generation, probably the 3 bigger sources. For power generation, as we move away from coal, we move much more to gas. Obviously, burning gas is a much cleaner fuel than coal, so much lower in terms of the air pollutants that it emits. And it's a pretty clean fuel. As I said, we're reducing our coal burning down from around 15% that we've got now to squeeze that more or less out by the mid-2030s, and that will help significantly. For land transport, probably air quality at the roadside level is the one that impacts most on public health. So again, government has been doing a lot of work recently to try and improve the performance of the engines used in public transport and heavy goods vehicles and so on, by taking some of the more polluting vehicles off the road. But obviously electrification, or come to that, hydrogen fuel cell would reduce those roadside air emissions to 0. So that's an immediate quick win with the electrification of transport. On the marine side, government's done a good job in cooperating with authorities across the boundary, so that we now have Pearl River Delta areas that are much more sort of emissions friendly zone, as it were, to reduce the emissions from the marine sector, which of course is important in Hong Kong and in Guangdong. And there are steps that the government's announced that it's going to look at to try and improve that still further. So one area is the use of LNG for bunkering ships that berth in Hong Kong. That would significantly reduce air emissions a step further. So yes, there's more to be done. Some good progress so far, but I think clean energy is in 2 respects, as I mentioned, not only in terms of carbon, but in terms of air emissions too. And today, around 1/3 of CLP's electricity is emissions free, both in a carbon sense and in an air pollutant sense, because it comes from nuclear power. So we already made a start, but acknowledge that we need to do more.
Great. Thank you, Jim, on that. Second question we have, What is the percentage of carbon emissions associated with wastewater treatment plants in Hong Kong? In most countries, 1% of total electricity to be used in wastewater treatment plants. So perhaps, Nigel, you could talk on this topic?
I suspect not, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right. Jim, over to you on wastewater.
Let me try and help. It's
Okay.
difficult to comment on the precise usage of a particular customer, obviously, draining services. But it would be dependent, of course, on the carbon intensity of the electricity supply they have. So I can't talk for any wastewater treatment plants on Hong Kong Island, but in our supply area, as I said, probably our carbon intensity today, very roughly 0.37, 0.38 kilograms per kilowatt hour, which, Bradley, I think more or less is about 20% lower than the average for the US. But I think as we reduce our carbon intensity, and we talked about getting to 60 to 70% zero carbon by 2035, my guess is that CLP's carbon footprint will fall from around that 0.37, 0.38 level to maybe less than 0.2. So that will actually help DSD as it deals with those treatment activities. One other thing though, if you're treating wastewater or sewage, there may be the opportunity for biogas production. And actually, the government here has been quite forward thinking in looking to try and create the opportunity to use that on site to reduce its electricity consumption. So I think, to be fair to government here, they have made some strides in that area. And whilst that may be a major problem internationally and still an issue in Hong Kong, progress is being made.
Okay, I will make a comment if I may. Hong Kong has also got one of the highest water consumptions per capita in the world, and in fact it's going up. We're very much dependent on the water being pumped in from the mainland. There are questions about the resources of that, and of course pumping water is a very energy demanding. The water is treated very well, the water is to a tremendous standard, but inevitably we will consume electricity in doing so. So I really think one of the areas of government should be is reducing water consumption in Hong Kong. The water here is very cheap. The prices have not gone up since 1997, and I really think this should be a focus, and it will have the knock-on effects of reducing energy demand for pumping what is a very heavy product around town.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's astonishing that water prices haven't gone up since '97. I mean, I'm from Nevada, and you can imagine with the drought in the U.S., especially in the West Coast, my water bills have gone up significantly, and as a result, demand drops. Question number 3 on the plan, and this is for CLP, on the plan to increase the use of zero carbon fuels. What is CLP's plan to upgrade existing generation assets to accommodate hydrogen mixed fuels for power generation?
That's another really good question. Actually, this leads me to talk about a good example of cooperation between Hong Kong and the US. Quite a few of our turbines are from GE. So we've actually signed an MOU with General Electric to actually run a project in the next few years to look at blending some hydrogen into one of our natural gas combined cycle turbine units, so that we can monitor the performance of the burner and the other systems that the plant uses to operate. So that MOU has been signed, and we're starting work now together to look at how we can introduce the concept of hydrogen into our CCGTs. Now that is probably going to be something that takes us 2 or 3 years to get some experience. It's fairly early in terms of technology development around the world. There are not very many plants yet which are running on hydrogen, more looking at blending as we are, but that will give us a sense of how we go with the existing turbines to also take hydrogen in. Our understanding is that probably those units can burn maybe 15, 20, 30% without too much modification. But actually, if they were to run on 100% green hydrogen in the future, they can be modified. It will not be for free, but it will be a lot cheaper than building a brand new plant per se. And we do think that keeping plant in Hong Kong is important, as I mentioned, to underpin that reliability, which is essential for the city. So good question. We're a little bit ahead of the game there in the sense that we have that MOU signed with GE, and we will be working to assess the performance of some of our turbines with blended hydrogen in the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Great, thank you, Jim. Next question we've got, and I think I can take this one. What will be done or what is going to be done to help level the playing field for U.S. companies to compete in the Hong Kong market in the business world? Or do U.S. companies have a possible upper hand to compete in the business world? Or what companies need to be, do companies need to be competitive in the business world in Hong Kong? Well, I can tell you, certainly from our role at the U.S. consulate in the commercial section, we are all about helping American companies compete and win, to introduce them to partners, agents, distributors of their products in Hong Kong, certainly introduce them to the likes of CLP, Hong Kong Electric, Nigels company. As Nigel mentioned, U.S. companies have many leading technologies in waste management. And so the real challenge, as Nigel mentioned, is it can be quite bureaucratic and complicated for U.S. companies, particularly if they're outside of Hong Kong or outside the region, to even begin the process of bidding on or competing for locally issued tenders. So in that respect, it's very important, and that's, again, one of our primary roles is to make sure that they have the right partner agent locally on the ground that can help U.S. companies to navigate and participate in these tenders. Obviously, the COVID travel restrictions have been very challenging for companies to be able to come over here and meet. We're very hopeful, and the announcement just on Monday about the reduction in travel quarantine requirements to 7 days is a great first step. Frankly, we're advocating for zero quarantine and also opening up for non-Hong Kong ID holders to be able to come back to the territory. But clearly, we've seen a good step in the right direction therein. I would like to mention one of the bigger areas that we do to help Hong Kong companies as well to go to the U.S. and meet with our U.S. companies is our efforts to promote, in particularly Waste Expo. We've got Ryan from the environmental team lead with us. Ryan, perhaps you could just talk very briefly about how we're supporting inbound, in this case, Hong Kong companies to meet with U.S. firms at some of the larger waste-related trade shows in the U.S.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So as you mentioned, Waste Expo is one of, if not the largest solid waste and recycling show in North America. And it's taking place this year from May 9th through 12th in Las Vegas, Nevada, back in your home state, Brad. And we partner with the trade show organizers at Waste Expo and work actively on the trade show floor to try to connect any of the international delegates who are coming to the show to the U.S. companies that are exhibiting there. We have a physical presence at the show. We are on hand to help direct you, guide you, and put you in front of some of the leading technology and solutions providers. And as part of our partnership, the participation for international delegates on the expo portion is entirely waived. It's free for international delegates who are coming through our program. And then the conference and education portions are offered at a 50% reduced rate. So, certainly for any of the Hong Kong companies that are interested in the show, my contact information, as well as that of Brad, Kitty, Paul, my colleagues in Hong Kong, are going to be on the last slide. If it's something you're interested in participating in, we would certainly welcome your interest and can work with you. I also recognize May is coming up relatively quickly. This is an annual show and an annual partnership we do with the show. So this would not be the last chance. Thanks, Brad.
Great, thanks. And I know that we're slightly over on time. We'll just open up just for a couple more questions, if that's all right. Since Hong Kong has limited manufacturing capacity, what is the opportunity for recycled products or the use of recycled materials?
Yeah, I think there's more. And the case we've been making to the government is that they often talk about reindustrialization. And reindustrialization can mean not just the old textile factories that we used to have and that made Hong Kong what it is, but using these new innovative techniques, high-tech solutions. There is absolutely no reason why we can't start recreating and remanaging these businesses here. So I think technology is enabling us to reindustrialize to a level that we want to be as an advanced country. But yeah, we are very small. We are just at the very bottom of China. My push has been, how do we work more with the Greater Bay Area and enable these materials to be moved? But certainly we are seen as a separate waste authority, you might say, and therefore we cannot readily move these materials into China unless they are properly processed in the first place. So we just can't send, like we used to, containers full of mixed plastic across to China and say, there you are, you sort it out. There's plenty of opportunities here for us to do that sorting and processing before that goes through remanufacture in China. So I do think there's opportunities for industry and reprocessing in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Great. Just last two quick questions. How, and this is for Jim, how have the renewable energy certificate / feed-in tariff schemes generally been received in Hong Kong? And how effective has this system been in terms of, I guess, growing the use of, in this case, rooftop solar, and also in reducing carbon emissions? Jim, can you unmute yourself?
Apologies. Yes, let's take RECs first, renewable energy certificates. It's a good question. I think in the last year or two, we've seen quite a rapid growth in sales of those. In fact, more recently, we've had a number of customers who come in and ask for multi-year RECs on a more significant scale. I think people are now beginning to look at their ESG targets, their expectations that the boards have set for them. And we're beginning to see quite a pickup in terms of sales of RECs. They are important in the sense that, unlike any other carbon credits, they actually support local RE generation here in Hong Kong. So they're location specific. We're aware of other opportunities that companies have to purchase carbon reduction certificates, EU ETS or in the States or wherever, but these ones are made in Hong Kong. So they are actually supporting the local community here as it gears up to generate more RE. On FIT, feed-in tariff scheme, that has been enormously successful. We are looking at tens of thousands of customers who've applied and been accepted into the scheme. Now that's surpassed our expectations and probably governments too. The scheme is quite a generous one, should I put it that way. The FIT rates are pretty high by comparison around the world, but we think that's been necessary to get things moving in Hong Kong. And of course, as we begin to build more applications, then the service providers that help support those applications, the suppliers, the engineering companies, the building companies that work with customers to develop their projects also get more economies of scale. So I think actually it's probably been pretty successful. I think probably there's still more opportunity though. CLP Power in its supply area has quite a high proportion of its housing stock in what we call village houses here in Hong Kong. Relatively low rise, 3 stories with a flat roof. So I think there's more to go for. And we would encourage as many folks as can to look at their contractors and see whether they can get an application into us for more rooftop PV.
Great. And then lastly, for CLP, as more renewable energy projects are developed in Guangdong, could you share the feasibility of Hong Kong to tap into Guangdong's renewable energy resources? And in this regard, will CLP be setting a different tariff for the commercial sector to drive energy reduction? And for Alba, on the other side of the value chain, how do we encourage the utilization and acceptance of recycled materials? So that's actually a couple different questions. So first, maybe to Jim.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Again, another good question. In terms of tariffs, CLP broadly adopts a reference policy that the cost for supply are met by those particular groups of customers. So as of today, we have 4 different tariff groups. We have actually one for residential premises. We have a sort of a general commercial non-residential tariff. We also have 2 larger tariffs, large power and bulk tariff, and they're broadly cost reflective for those customers. So I think at the moment we already have some of those differentiations in place. When we look at RE on the mainland, that is developing, but again, a little bit like Hong Kong. Guangdong has seen quite a lot of urbanization over the last couple of decades, and actually probably some of the best opportunities are now in offshore wind. A lot is being built off the coast of Guangdong. We intend to pursue our own project in Hong Kong, but we are open to seeing whether we could obtain additional supplies of RE in the future as more projects are built in Guangdong. We do have interconnection with the mainland, so we have the opportunity to think about how we get that power from Guangdong into Hong Kong. But what we need to bear in mind is our reliability constraints, so we'll need to have a mixture of different fuels in that fuel mix. So probably zero carbon with a stable production, something like nuclear, which we currently have today. But RE2 also, more intermittent, but with energy storage and other techniques, we think we could probably manage that. So I think, Nigel, you mentioned the GBA a couple of times. We're seeing a lot more integration now in a number of respects, and probably over the next couple of decades or so, we'll continue to see that process accelerate. So yes, I think we'd be open to looking at the possibility of some additional RE through regional cooperation in the future.
Great. Simon, perhaps you could just talk briefly about the, this previous question was how can U.S. companies get engaged here? I mentioned what we're doing, but we'd love to hear on what you guys are doing as far as facilitating cooperation between the U.S. and Hong Kong in the environmental space.
Well, thank you, Bradley, for bringing that up. I think it's important to understand that, doing business in Hong Kong, other than having, great technologies and innovation, for the market here in Hong Kong, I think another important point is you get to understand the local situation. And to do that, you really need to look for a good local partner. For example, the U.S. commercial service in Hong Kong. And BC could be another, good local partner. Now, I also want to emphasize that other than technologies and hard skill, because in Hong Kong, even if you are in the US, you need to engage the Hong Kong government. You need to engage some local partners or business partners in Hong Kong, and that kind of soft skill, I would say, is equally important. Very often, when you compete with another country or another region in terms of the technology, I would say it's pretty close. Sometimes it's all down to the cost and other opportunities. But if you have the kind of skills to get into a conversation with the right people within the structure, not necessarily only within the government structure, but also within the landscape, within the ecosystem, I think it will also give you a good advantage to do business in Hong Kong. So that would be my 2 pence. And forgive me to do some advertisement. I think BEC would be one of the good partners for any overseas companies, especially those from the US, to start understanding the situation in Hong Kong, the local chemistry, the policy situation, and we can help and guide you and direct you to the right kind of people having the right kind of conversation. So thank you, Bradley.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one last quick question about sludge from wastewater treatment plants. What's happening in the digester and waste to energy as far as digesters is happening in Hong Kong? Is that currently, do we have some plants that are being built?
Nigel, do you want to take that one, or would you like me to pick that one up?
Yeah, well, I'll just say quickly on digestion. Yes, on the larger treatment plants in the new where there's more space, the government has been developing digestion tanks. We do have an issue here that flushing water is often seawater, and so saline water is not very good for methane production from the digestion tanks. But the government is looking at co-digestion with food waste, but a lot of the plants don't have these. The sludge that is taken from the very large facility is actually taken to a large thermal waste to energy plant, very close to CLP, very attractive plant for dealing with the sludge there, and again recovering some energy from that sludge.
Great. All right, I'd like to turn it over really quick as we start to wrap up to Ryan Reynolds. He's got a couple of slides to go through.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I just wanted to take a quick minute. We've heard a lot in the course of the conversation tonight about the opportunities and the fact that we've got a fantastic team on the ground with Brad and Paul and Kitty. But for our US participants, I just wanted to highlight that that is one of an entire global network of offices around the world, really set up and designed to help you compete and access opportunities to showcase your solutions, whether they be services or products. On just very quickly, the ways we help companies is through providing counseling, market intelligence, including through events like the one we are all participating in tonight to highlight where those opportunities lie for your company, as well as the matchmaking, which we've talked about, the fact that we can help you find that right local partner that Simon was saying is so critical to your success in Hong Kong. And then also there is an element of commercial diplomacy and advocacy. So one of our questions that came in is about how we help to level the playing field for US companies. Our advocacy center is available for US companies who are competing on public tenders. And we do work every day to try to ensure fair trade opportunities and practices for our US companies to compete. Next slide, please. And just to bring it into a little bit tighter focus, how we organize ourselves around the world, because we have about 100 offices in the US and then offices in about 75 countries. We have global teams, which I have the honor of leading our environmental technologies team that brings all of that expertise and those resources together to help benefit our US exporting companies. So here on the slide, which you'll all receive a copy of, is a hyperlink to our industry website, where you'll find upcoming events and programs we're supporting, the latest market intelligence, and in fact, we just published an Environmental Technologies Resources Guide, which has market snapshot reports from 22 countries around the world, and we continue to add to that. We also publish a monthly newsletter, which you will be able to sign up for on that website, that will enable you to stay up to speed on events like that we're hosting tonight, like the Waste Expo program we talked about. And then Sarah, if you could advance one more slide. This is just another example of the type of programming we offer. Our next event is going to be a virtual trade mission to India focused on clean air, so air pollution control technologies, air quality monitoring, and any of those solutions or services that are focused on clean air technologies. That is just a quick recap. We really, because we've seen some of the questions come in today, it's a common question we get from our exporting clients. How can I access the opportunities that I'm hearing about? We will have our contact information on the final slide. As I said, there are over 100 offices across the US, so there is a local trade specialist near you that will serve as your conduit into that global network of trade professionals and trade expertise. With that, Brad, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again. So to wrap up, I'd like to hand it back to our Consul General, Hanscom Smith, for a few closing remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad. In closing, I'd just like once again to thank our partners, especially the Hong Kong Business Environment Council, as well as our speakers, Simon, Nigel, and Jim. I think today's program has been an excellent way to highlight all of the many opportunities for American companies here in Hong Kong in implementing our shared climate goals. And all of us here in Hong Kong, as well as our counterparts back in Washington, and you have their information, are standing by to help support American businesses as they work to enter and be successful here in the market. So again, thank you very much for taking part in today's program, and we'll look forward to following up with you in future weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, CG. With that, again, I echo Consul General Smith's comments. We're really here to help, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with Simon, certainly with CLP and Nigel, as the territory begins to open up, and hopefully, certainly, let's hope by next May, we can welcome a lot of Hong Kong companies to Waste Expo and some of the big shows in the US to be able to facilitate that. So thanks again for everybody and our speakers today for your comments, and we'll see y'all soon.
Brad, real quick, I just want to mention to our team and our panelists, in case you have the time to just join us in a post-webinar quick debrief session. So if you want to hold on for just a second, and we will move on to that.
Okay, thanks a lot.